I'm so excited to have all of you here today for the new update webinar on utilizing the business module. This has been a long time coming. Our product team has been working hard on this, and we're thrilled to finally roll it out. We've taken your feedback and we've built something that we really think will help level up how you support clients who own businesses. The business module is designed to help advisors plan, strategize, and run scenarios around a client's business, whether you're just starting to add business planning into your process or building out detailed proposals. We've also streamlined the data entry process, making it easier to input business-owned asset and liabilities while giving you more granular control over revenues and expenses. So it's all about giving you flexibility and precision without adding too much complexity. Today, we're going to be covering some key features like reviewing the separate data entry changes in the net worth, as well as covering how to add those business-owned assets and liabilities. We'll also pivot to cover some illustrative visuals under the new business module, and we'll also cover how to propose, compare, and implement new strategies in the business module as well. I'll also show you how to generate a report deliverable for the business module. And then I also have some really common FAQs we've seen come in from a lot of advisors who've been playing with the business module. So I think it'll be helpful to go over those as well. And then of course, we'll open it up for a Q&A at the end. So before we dive into all that fun stuff though, I just want to touch on a couple of quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and you will receive a copy after the webinar is completed into your inbox. And then, like I mentioned, we will also have a Q&A at the end, so feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A Zoom control panel below, and I'll be sure to answer as many as I can before the top of the hour. Let's dive right into it. So overall, with the new business module, the data entry is very similar to our other business entries in the past. If you'll remember, we did enter them under the Profile Net Worth tab. So I'm going to direct your attention first to Profile, Net Worth, and we're going to start here just to review those data entry changes with the new module. So if we scroll down a little bit and look on the left side, we can see here that previously businesses were included in the other asset category in the bottom. But now we can see we have an individualized business category that breaks out businesses for us in a separate spot to help us keep better track of these items. I do have some pre-built businesses out for us so we can get those nice visuals within the business module, but let's just start with a clean slate business data entry and I'll go over the changes with you so we can see exactly what's going on with the new update. We can see here that a lot of this looks really familiar in terms of naming the business. All the data entry fields look very similar to the rest of Right Capital. The business types themselves have also remained the same, where we have the core 4 LLC, partnership, S Corp, and C Corp items. So nothing has changed in terms of the business types we're able to enter within the system. And then looking at the next section here, we also have our value approach field. So if you'll remember, this allows us to indicate the current value of the business as well as apply a growth figure to that current value. And then of course, within the value approach, if we didn't want to use something so simple, we do have the ability to enter a detailed schedule, which lets us be more granular in the year-over-year growth of the value of the business. The main difference within the value approach section here is we now have included a value accumulation field. There are two different settings within value accumulation. The first one is standard. Standard is what we typically would see within a Right Capital business on the previous side of things, where when there are profits to a business, they do not get included into the business value, and they're kind of treated as their own separate item. We now have the ability to select an advanced value accumulation, and this allows for the profits to grow the business further. In other words, the profits are retained in the business with the advanced option. Right below this, we also have revenue and expense approaches. We can apply a simple growth figure. We have our annual revenue and annual expenses now broken out, and we have separate growth fields for each. Previously, in this area, you would just enter a net income figure. So we really eliminated a math step in the middle there and just allowed you to enter revenue and expenses with their own growths in separate fields. And then of course, not only do we have that simple growth figure, but we can also use that detailed schedule if we want to get really granular. And I do want to specify our annual revenue field is going to include those pre-tax gross profits. And then expenses are going to be costs that reduce the annual revenue. And I'll go ahead and click into the detailed schedule just to show you what that looks like. Again, really familiar information here. Perfect. Moving right along as well, we have our distribution approach. So I scroll down a bit. Our distribution approach is still very similar, but we now have not only the ability to enter that detailed schedule, we have our simple growth option, which allows us to just enter a distribution as well as the growth on that. But now, instead of only having to distribute an annual dollar amount, we have added the ability to distribute a percentage of the pre-tax profit as well as a percentage of the total revenue. So we have a little more granular control over the distribution type when it comes to these business distributions. One thing I also want to specify quickly here is the impact of our value accumulation field on our distribution approach. If we have the standard value approach selected, the client will continue to receive the distributions regardless of the income, and business assets will not be liquidated. However, if we're using the advanced value approach selection in the field above, business assets will be liquidated to fund the distribution if the distribution brings the business into a negative net flow. The distributions will follow the order or will follow this specific order regardless of the withdrawal sequence set in the settings, meaning that bank accounts are going to be just depleted first, then investment accounts. And then when both account types are depleted, a borrowing balance is going to be tracked to fund that deficit. So again, if the business distributions are putting the business into a cash flow deficit and we're using the advanced value approach field, the business will liquidate bank accounts first, then investment accounts, and then it will generate a borrowing balance once those accounts are depleted to track that deficit. The borrowing balance will then be paid back from investments if and when any excess investments are available in the future. I also want to specify that business properties and other fixed assets will never be liquidated to fund deficits. And then one more note as well. When we're utilizing percentages for the pre-tax profit or the percentage of total revenue, the distribution of the profits cannot exceed 100%. So be sure to pay attention to those key data entry points. Fantastic. And then at the very bottom here, we just have our year of sale information. Should you be modeling a sale in the system within the current plan, this is where it's done. Nothing much has changed here. We can specify when the business was acquired. If there's a cost basis, we can indicate when this sale might be occurring, as well as any cost associated to it. And then we also have our sale options, which allow us to indicate if we want to utilize a lump sum payment for the sale, or if we're going to be modeling the sale with installment years. Now, of course, throughout the data entry, we have all these little info marks at our disposal as we're going through. So if you ever have any questions on what item goes in specific fields, don't hesitate to utilize the information in these info marks to get a little bit more clarity. We also have a lot of great resources in the Help Center that have been rolled out to help you understand the data entry within the new business update. So I'll be sure to plug those later on in the webinar. Fantastic. So we've covered the basics of the changes within the business data entry. The big feedback item that we've gotten from so many advisors has been the ability to enter business-owned assets and liabilities. So before we dive into the business module, I just want to show you what it looks like to enter a business asset. It's very similar to entering a trust-owned asset in the system. So we'll utilize still our add account feature. We can go ahead and select maybe a bank account. And then within the owner field, we will see the businesses listed down below. So in this case, this is the business that I just created for that simple data entry. So if I hit business as the owner, I'll go ahead and hit save, and we'll see that business bank account now populate under the business. So it'll always display under the business if it's marked with a business as the owner. We will not see bank accounts displayed with business marked as the owner in the bank account category. For example, I have this S Corp business entered in here, and if I break down my additional details, we can see we have the core value of the business, as well as a rental property, a mortgage on the property, and a separate loan. So we have 3 different items within this business, and when we contract the details, we can see the core value do that math out for us. So we can expand it out and see exactly what's making up these business entries. I'm going to go ahead and remove this business entry so that way our business module looks nice and clean with the items that I have entered for us. But now that we've covered the data entry and we've covered how to add these business-owned assets and liabilities, we can move on to the business module. The business module is going to be found in the More menu. So the 3 dots along the top here, and then Business. Here we have our business module. It's comprised of a series of tabs. The first tab that we land on is going to be the Summary tab. This is going to give us a glimpse of the key items for our business information. It gives us a snapshot of our business value, breaking out our assets, equity, and liabilities within the business. These are interactive charts. As you can see, I'm hovering over the items to get some additional information. And then on the right-hand side here, we also have a display of our first year cash flows, including revenue, expenses, pre-tax profit, and distributed earnings. We can use the drop-down in the upper corner here to filter for all businesses, or if we want to isolate a specific business, we can take a look at that as well. So we can see here for the first business, which is an LLC, we have different items populating. And then for the S Corp, and for that second LLC in the system. So again, we can see the S Corp does have some loans in the system. So we do see those populate there. So this is a really great high-level visual of the businesses we have entered over in Profile Net Worth. Moving right along here, we also have our balance sheet. This is going to be a nice table view of the assets and liabilities that make up specific businesses entered in the system. If I scroll up and look at this drop down here, again, we have similar functionality where we can look at all of the businesses. And if we scroll down, we can see them all broken out. The LLC, the core business value, if there are liabilities included. In this case, I have assets and liabilities in the S Corp for visual purposes, so we can see the total assets, the total liabilities, and we can see what that equity figure is as well. So it's fully broken out. And then of course, utilizing the drop down, we can isolate looking at specific businesses if we don't want to display all of them in one spot. Fantastic. The heavy hitter within this new module is going to be these businesses tabs. The business tab allows us to model future revenue, expenses, distributions, and even a business sale to build dynamic proposals. So this is where the real planning proposal power kicks in with the module. We have the ability to utilize our action items down below, which I'll touch on in a moment, and we can really build out these different business proposals. Before I jump into that, though, I want to specify that each business in the net worth is going to have its own business tab. So we have 3 businesses entered in the net worth, as you remember. We have the LLC, the S Corp, and then the second LLC. So depending on which strategies we're running, the action items that we're affecting are dependent on the item that we have selected or the tab that we are navigating within. So right now, if we're looking at the first LLC, we can see we have a nice visual displaying the business revenue for the current strategy as of now, meaning what's entered over in the net worth tab. We can utilize this drop-down caret to take a look at business revenue, expenses, distributions, total assets over time. And I'll go ahead and jump over to the S Corp because we do have assets in the S Corp. So we can see the growth in those assets over time. And then we are modeling a sale later on in the plan, and that's why we're seeing those depleted down to 0. And then we can also look at capital gains at the sale of a business. So some really helpful visuals here to show us exactly what's going on. That'll give a nice comparisons once we manipulate the action items down below. So I'll go ahead and put this back to business revenue, and we'll scroll down and take a look at what we've got going on in the action items. The action items allow us to model a proposed strategy. So we have our current strategy on the right side, which is pulling in information, I should say, from our current plan over in the Profile Net Worth tab. And then our proposed strategy has the ability for us to manipulate these action items to make changes. We can see here we can manipulate the sales strategy, the revenue and expense strategy, and the distribution strategy. We could take a look at what it looks like to model a different year of sale. Maybe we're looking at modeling the sale a little bit later down in the future. And we can see here the core business value is calculated for us down at the bottom. So it's projecting out what the value of the business would be at that time based on the inputs in the net worth tab. If we have an idea of what the business is going to be worth at that time and we don't want to utilize the calculated projection, we can enter a customized amount in here to see exactly what figure we want to analyze. I'll go ahead and pop this back over to calculated. And then of course we can manipulate the sale option. So if we wanted to adjust, maybe looking at it's just a one lump sum payment instead of doing installments, which are indicated in the current plan, we can utilize that option as well. Once those changes are made, I can hit refresh at the very bottom, similar to our retirement analysis tab. And if I scroll back up to the top, we can see in real time the dynamic change that the proposed strategy has based on the current strategy. This allows us to compare, like I said, revenue, but we can also see the difference in expenses as well as the other metrics up above. The current strategy is the darker shaded area and the proposal is the lighter shaded area. If I scroll back down here just to show you some other options within our strategies, we can also look at the revenue and expense strategy. Now I included a detailed schedule within the current plan just to show you this one example. If we are utilizing a detailed schedule, but maybe we're doing a more simple proposal and don't want to build out another full detailed schedule, we can propose something like a simple growth option as well. So we can make adjustments to our revenue growth, expenses, and expense growth. However, we can also propose a completely separate detailed schedule should we want to get super granular and make those changes as well. And then lastly, at the bottom, we have our distribution strategy, allowing us to model a different type of distribution. Maybe we want to look at a percentage of profit for our distribution, and we can utilize the slider to make that adjustment as well. Go ahead and hit refresh, and we can see exactly what that looks like here. And we can see based on those changes what the difference in the distributions is within the charts above. Now, say we're building multiple business strategies, right? We built out one strategy and say we want to build out another strategy for the same business. We do have the ability to utilize this edit button in the bottom corner for some additional features. So the edit items and strategies drawer that opens up not only allows us to select specific items to manipulate, say we do not want to mess around with a business distribution strategy, we can hide this feature. So it fully isolates the only action items we want to manipulate. I'll go ahead and re-include that. And then at the very bottom here, we can also add additional strategies. So we have our first strategy that we propose selling this business a little bit later, but maybe we can click add strategy here. We can title this whatever is most relevant for us. I'll go ahead and hit the check mark to save the title, and I'll hit save. This will then give us the ability to propose another strategy for the same business. There's going to be a drop-down caret next to the proposed strategy. And if I click on that, it allows us to manipulate strategy 2 for our action items. So we can really get granular on the amount of strategies we're proposing for these clients. And if we scroll up to the top here, we do have the ability to do this for each of the other asset or businesses entered in the plan. Fantastic. Alrighty, so that is a comprehensive look of our action items as well. Once we've gone through and built out our different proposals, we can then move over to our strategies tab. Now, the strategies tab allows us to evaluate the broader impact of business scenarios on invested assets and taxes. If we take a look here, we have our strategies scenario analysis chart where we can look at invested assets. We can also look at taxes. So in this case, we're modeling a sale in the future, so we have a bit higher tax payment on that sale. We can have a nice comparison here. If we scroll down to the action items, we have 3 businesses. We also have the ability to make 3 business strategies, right? So if we scroll down here, we have the ability to isolate specific strategies. We could only run maybe 1 strategy and see what that impact is on the current plan. Then we can run 2 strategies and see what that impact is, or we can run all 3. Now I only have 1 strategy, which is why the values aren't changing. However, if you were running multiple strategies and you wanted to isolate for that comparison versus the current plan, we have that functionality within the strategies tab. And again, we can see that for invested assets as well. The blue shaded area is what we have falling in from the current plan, and the green shaded area is our proposed business plan. The very last tab of the business module is our details tab. And this allows us to dive into the detailed annual reports for a complete picture of our business performance year over year. This is similar to our cash flow tables, and there we get that annual figures real deep into what's going on behind the scenes after we've implemented our strategies. We have our all businesses drop down in the upper corner here. So again, as we're making these adjustments, we can isolate the changes and just maybe look at the S Corp. We can also look at not only profits and distributions, but a business value summary, which I'll touch on shortly. We have profit and distributions, which is showing us our revenue, expenses, pre-tax profit, and distributions. And then if we are modeling the sale of the business, as we are later on in this plan, we can see here the very proceeds from that installment sale. If we click into the underlined column headers, we'll see not only are we looking at the core business income, but we also see income from the rental property that's included in this business. And then we also have this other income field, which is the investment income from the investment account in the business. So as we're going through and looking at the different assets within a business, we can see the income that's generated from each assets to make up that total revenue. So like I said, it gives us a nice granular breakdown of exactly everything going on underneath the hood of the car here. Expenses is the same strategy where we have our core business expense, as well as many expenses related to the real estate or interest on debt if we have debt expenses within the business as well. So it's a nice breakdown of the different items here. And then of course, profit and distributions. We can also look at the business value summary that shows us the current value of the core business. It shows us the investments within the business, real estate. We can look at that growth over time, and the debt within the business. So we can look at the mortgage for that rental property as well as the other loans. And then of course we can track the total business value until the last year of the projection or until the sale of the business. This download icon in the upper corner, I always like to point out as well, allows you to download this information into a CSV file or an Excel sheet, should you be interested in getting that information to manipulate within Excel. Fantastic. So that's a high-level overview of the business module. I see a lot of questions coming in that I'm happy to get to. Let me quickly touch on the report deliverable for the business module, just to give you a glimpse of what that looks like once we've gone through and built out our strategies. We'll go ahead and navigate to the report feature. So gear icon report, the same spot you'll generate any other report within the system. If we scroll down here, we can find the business module, and we can see here that the business module is underlined. This gives us some additional flexibility on what exactly we want to include in this report. I'll go ahead and select everything, but of course you can pick and choose specifically the module tabs or visual graphs that you want to include depending on what you're trying to highlight to your client. We also have the select businesses toggle in the bottom corner here that allow us to look at either one business or all of the businesses within the system. I'll go ahead and click done, and I'm going to download this as a selected pages. This is going to download as a PDF to your computer. And once this is done downloading, I'll just open it up to give you a glimpse of what that looks like. It's very similar to other reports within Right Capital, where we can look at the business summary tab, where we have those visuals for the first business. And then of course, this is a large report since I've included all of the businesses, but you can get granular on what you decide to include in here. This is the balance sheet for the LLC. And again, this is a smaller balance sheet because there's no assets within this business. But of course, if you have included assets, they will be included within this report. We also have the revenue charts. I've included everything so we can see exactly what this all looks like. Very similar to the other report generation features within Right Capital. Here's the business details. If you wanted to highlight that year-over-year selection for our profits and distributions, we have that as well. You can also look at our business value summary. So really granular on what we can include in the reports as well, and very similar to how you would generate any other report within the system. To learn more about the business module, we do also have resources within our help center. Let me quickly just touch on how to access our help center for anybody who might not be familiar. The easiest way to get to the help center is going to be within this chat icon in the bottom corner, and then you can search our help center. This will bring you directly to our help center, and you can search all things business to get information on the business module. And you can see we have not only a module overview, there's training videos, there's frequently asked questions, data entry, strategies, and specific tabs as well within the business module. So a lot of resources in the Help Center. I always just like to plug that for anybody who's not familiar. Don't hesitate to head over there and get some additional information. But before we dive into today's live Q&A, I also want to take a few minutes to highlight some of the most frequently asked questions we've received so far about the business module. These have come up often as advisors have been exploring the new functionality, so I think it will be helpful to walk through them together. Give me a moment just to pivot over to my PowerPoint here, and we'll take a quicker look at some of these FAQs. And bear with me just a second as I get this up for us. Alrighty. So we have just a few slides here of business FAQs, and I believe my screen is visible. Fantastic. Alrighty. Just let me know if anybody can't see my screen, but I think we should be good here. Perfect. So two of the most popular ones, what happens to previously existing businesses? So previously existing businesses will have been converted to the new data entry points. The two biggest ones that are going to have the most impact are going to be our annual revenue field. It was previously annual income. So you'll remember there was an annual income field within the older way to enter businesses within Right Capital. So whatever was entered in annual income will now shift over in that annual revenue. And then right below that, you'll have to enter in those annual expenses separately. So just pay attention to the revenue and expenses field if you do have existing businesses, just to make sure we get those accurately corrected for the new data entry. And then the other data entry for previous income growth percentage is now going to be moved for distribution and revenue growth percentages. So those income growth percentages, we've broken them out, distribution percentage and revenue growth percentage, as well as that expense growth percentage. So just paying attention to the income growth and making sure we're now separating out income and expenses. The next question here would be is the value of the business included in the Monte Carlo? This is going to be treated very similar to the real estate in Right Capital. So the value of the business is not going to be included into the Monte Carlo calculation. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Monte Carlo is going to be that probability of success score in the retirement analysis tab. So again, the value of the business is not included in the Monte Carlo unless the business is sold and the proceeds are saved into the investment accounts. Moving right along here, we also have which assets can be owned by a business. I wanted to make sure we can cover all the different assets we can include under a business. Right now, that's going to be investment properties, vacation loans, land, and other assets. The primary home cannot be owned by a business. Insurance policies cannot be owned by a business, and stock plans cannot be owned by a business. So I just want to point out that right now it's investment properties, vacation homes, land, and other assets. The next frequently asked question is if we can propose new businesses in the business module. Right now, the business module is only to display existing businesses entered in profile net worth. So if you're modeling a business purchase over in retirement analysis, that is not going to currently flow into the business module. Right now, it's only going to display existing businesses entered in profile net worth. Alrighty, next question. What happens to, oh, my slide duplicated. Here we go. Sorry about that. If the business distributions would cause the business to have a negative net flow for a given year, will the system still allow for the full distribution to take place? So this is covering distributions in the business. If the revenue is cut short and we're distributing and that's going to cause the business value to fall into the negative, we will always show the full distribution taking place regardless of how profitable the business is. If you are utilizing the advanced accumulation strategy in that value accumulation field, we will see the business value be negatively impacted within our details tab of the business module. When we track the business value, we will see that value negatively impacted. And then lastly here is if your client is only the partial owner of a business. So in the past, if your client was a partial owner of the business, you would have to just indicate the percentage of their ownership within the data entry. We didn't have a way to specify splitting an ownership between a client and their partner. So in this case, that's the same data entry. If you do have a client that is partial owner of a business, you would still have to separate the ownership for the percentage that the client owns within the data entry point. Moving right along here, this is the last slide, and then we'll get into that Q&A. But another frequently asked question is, what is the allocation of the accounts in the business? So the business has its own current allocation based on the accounts entered in the business. So right now you have the current allocation under the investment tab, which is based off of the investment accounts entered over in profile net worth for the client's personal investment information. And then anything we have under the business is going to be treated completely separate. So it's not going to be included in the current allocation, and it's not going to display in the asset allocation tab under the investment tab. The business is going to have its own current allocation, again, based on the accounts entered under the business. So it will have its own blended rate of return based on the accounts entered under the business. Fantastic. All right, so let me stop my share here. I believe we covered that last question as well. And I'll just share my Right Capital again here so we can get back into the business module. But let's see here. Before we dive into the Q&A, let's just recap what we've covered so far. We started by walking through the data entry process and highlighting how business information is now more structured with adding flexibility around revenue, expenses, distributions, and value accumulation. Then we explored the business module itself, including the summary here. for a snapshot of current performances, the balance sheet for business-specific assets and liabilities. Then we covered the business tab, where you can model future scenarios, a potential sale, or changes in expenses and revenues. Remember, each tab is one dedicated tab for each business over in net worth. We also looked at strategies to evaluate the broader financial impact against the current plan. And then lastly, we looked at the details tab for year-over-year reporting. We also took a look at some of those frequently asked questions to help clear any common points of confusion. And then, of course, if you have any more questions or want any more guidance, you know now how to access our help center too.